I'm Grossman, and this is In the Garden. You know, autumn is a time when most people are cutting back their perennials and preparing their beds for the winter. As you can see, I've already cut down a good deal of this garden, clearing away a lot of the dead perennials and things that have been killed by frost. But you know, there are certain perennials that you shouldn't cut down in the fall, and these basically fall into the category of plants that grow from a basal rosette of leaves. This is a basal rosette of leaves, okay? This plant's main leaves are very low to the ground, and they make like a little ring. From this ring, the flower stems come up. This is actually throwing a very late season bloom, but normally they would all be like this. The reason, here's another plant. This is a lobelia, and this grows from a very clear basal rosette of leaves. I cut off the old blooming stem, but I did not cut the leaves away. The reason for that is that these leaves actually protect the crown of the plant in the winter. And if you cut all these leaves off, the plant is more susceptible to winter damage. Another plant that you shouldn't cut down in the winter are these lamb's ears, which will actually hold their leaves for quite a long time in the winter, and then finally, usually in January or February, they'll just turn brown and dissolve. But it's very hard to remove the leaves without cutting the stems down too far, and thereby exposing. If I move this away, you can see these are the leaves that are going to come out in the spring. So we want to protect them. What I do with the lamb's ears is I leave the leaves all winter long, and then in the spring I just lightly lift them off and then cut down any stems that have died. Here's another plant over here, a very common one. This is a foxglove. This is the yellow digitalis. And again, this has a nice basal rosette of leaves. I cut off the flowering stems, but I didn't cut the leaves away. So if you have plants in your garden that are growing from a little low mound of leaves, it's better to leave them in place until the spring and then cut them down. What many people don't know is that fall is also a great time for planting. The reason for that is that for many plants, particularly deciduous plants and perennial shrubs that lose their leaves in the winter, they're not losing moisture through their leaves, and the roots continue to grow until the ground freezes. So even when it's 40 degrees outside or even 30 degrees outside, the ground is still relatively warm, and so the roots grow, so the plant is not stressed by having to keep water in its leaves and can just focus on root growth. Fall is also a great time to divide and transplant your perennials, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. I'm standing in front of a number of clumps of a garden phlox called bright eyes. Now, I'm going to divide these plants for two reasons. One, most perennials actually benefit from division after being in place for 3 to 5 years. It reinvigorates the plants. Also, I want to move some of these plants back into a space a little further behind where they're growing now. So I'm going to kill two birds with one stone and divide them and replant them where I want them. The first step in dividing any of your perennials is to cut the stems down. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is just go down here and cut all these stems off. You want to cut them pretty low because it will make the plants easier to work with. Okay, so when I'm done cutting it down, I want them all to be about that size. And you can see where certain of the plants are larger than others. This plant is actually still a good size, whereas this one you can see has a much larger number of individual stems, and you can see the new growth, the new buds for next year already starting to come out, but you can also see where there's some old growth in here that is looking a bit tired. So I'm just going to quickly do the same thing to all of these. And any pruner that you have is fine. You want to make sure your pruner is relatively sharp, just because it will make it easier. And you can go through quite quickly and do this. Once you get the hang of it, just go right through and take them all down from the bottom, like that. And this is what I've been doing to all the perennials in this garden that I'm cutting down this year. I basically am just cutting them low like this and removing the top growth. You can wait and cut your perennials down in the spring, but I find it easier to do it in the fall, where I don't have to be concerned with damaging the new spring growth. Now I'm going to walk over here. This is a dividing shovel. It's different than some other shovels or a planting. It's also called a planting spade because it's long and narrow, so you can easily cut right around your plant. So what I'm going to do now is just cut right around this plant like this. And lift it right out of the ground, okay? And then I'm going to shake off a lot of the loose soil. The other great thing about dividing perennials is that if you have some plants that you really like, it's a great way to increase your stock. So here's one that I just dug up. Now, I'm going to go into my bucket over here and grab a knife. Any sharp knife will do. It doesn't matter if it's serrated or smooth. You just need a little bit of courage. Now, if I wanted to, I could get easily 4 plants out of this, but because I want pretty instant show next year, I'm just going to split it in half. So I'm just going to take this knife and literally cut this plant right in half, like that. That is, oh, and there's a little piece of an iris growing in here. This is a very healthy division, okay? So I'm going to do that to that plant, and then I'm going to fill this hole back in like that, and then I'm going to take my shovel and I'm going to do that again. I'm going to do it to this one, and actually you can just lift them right out of the ground. And I'm going to move the mulch away, like that. And I'm going to shake off the soil. Now, if I was doing this in the spring, which is also a time that you can do this, I would not shake off as much of the soil because I would be more concerned about damaging the roots. Now this one again, I'm just going to cut it right in half. Just get right in there and just saw it right in half. It's amazing. See, now this is all, if you went to a nursery and bought a pot of phlox, that's probably about what you would get, is 2 or 3 stems like that. But I want bigger divisions, and you don't have to use every plant. Like for instance, this one to me looks a little bit weak, okay? It has not that many stems. You can see there's a lot of dead area in it. So I'm actually gonna discard these and just keep this division, which is fine because, and I'm gonna take that one out, we're going to have more plants than I actually need when we're done here. Do the same with this one. And just get right underneath there. This is a big one. And I'm just going to lift it up. And I'm just going to shake off. It's amazing with all the rain we've had that the soil, get rid of that, it's still a little dry, but that's okay. Now this one is actually going to divide itself. If I just go like this, actually no, I need the knife. I'm going to take this, just cut this piece right off. This works for your hostas, your astilbes, pretty much almost any perennial you can do this with. And it's as I said, it's a really great way if you want to give plants to a friend or if you want more. For another part of your garden. See, this is getting woody, and woody is never really a good thing with perennials. This knife is almost not sharp enough. And go through the other way. See, what I want to get rid of, see this middle part in here, where you can see it's woody, and there's no real growth. You can see the new purpley buds. That's what we want. What we don't want is this mess in here. So I'm going to show you something else. If your knife isn't working, you can actually take your shovel, place it right where you want to make the cut, and do that. And there you go. That also gives you a nice clean cut. Okay. Don't want to lose any of my tools. It's very easy to lose your tools when you're working in the soil. So you always want to think about where you're putting them down when you put them down. Remove this out of the way. Okay. And I'm going to fill this back in like this. Okay. Now where I want to put these is back in this space over here. So when you're planting perennials, you generally want to stagger them. So I already have a triangle going here. Actually, I'm going to take one more out. This one doesn't really need to be divided, but I want to take it out of here because next year I'm going to put something lower in the spring in that space. So, and you should never be afraid of digging your perennials up, moving them around if you don't like where they are. It's amazing how much abuse your plants can take and still come back each year. So now I'm going to set these out where I want them. And I'm basically going to evenly space them back through here. And again, you can see I'm putting in quite a number of them because I want a big, full show. Just like that. You see how they're staggered and they're evenly spaced? This one should go back there a little bit more. Now you may be wondering about this plant right here. This is Salvia uliginosa, and it's a tender perennial, which means that in most winters it's not hardy. Well, last winter I had one winter over because we had such a gentle winter weather-wise. So this year I've left them all. I just trimmed off the tops and left them, and I'm going to be curious to see if they're going to come back. Now once you place your plants where you want them, you just dig a new hole with your shovel. You want to plant them more or less at the height they were previously, but you want to cover. You can see in here, see all this brown? You want to cover that. That's where new roots are also going to grow. So I want to make sure that I'm planting it deep enough and that my hole is wide enough that I can give them. Now my soil is very good, so I don't have to worry about adding amendments at this point. But if you don't have good garden soil, it can always be helpful to go to the box store and buy a bag of compost, a bag of peat moss, and mix that in to your planting holes when you plant. But it actually goes very quickly. Again, I'm just going to dig another hole right here. I'm going to take this one. I'm just going to set it down. That's a little deep. There we go. And then I'm going to do this one right in here. That needs to be a little wider. It's always better to err on the side, particularly if you don't have good soil. You want to dig larger holes, not smaller, because you want your soil to be soft so that all the new roots that are going to grow out of here. That was the peacock being chased by a dog. And then you want to just tuck it all nicely down in there. Again, this one is a little deep. There we go. But see, I actually want to cover these buds so that they're not exposed to the winter weather. And so I'm actually going to end up with a larger clump of phlox than I started with, because for every one I dug up, I got at least 2 plants. We're almost done. I'm going to go back in here. This one I think too has a little bit too much wood, so I'm actually going to take this section off. Now this would make a very fine piece to replant again if you needed it. I don't actually need another one, so I might save that and give it to a friend. It's amazing the number of perennials I end up giving away every year when I do my divisions. I have a whole group of friends who always call me up and say, "Are you dividing anything this year?" And then I give things away. I'm going to put this one over here. If you're wondering what all these pine needles are, every fall I mulch my garden. I prefer to mulch it in the fall because it protects the plants in the winter, and also because it's much easier to walk in the garden in the fall because you don't have to worry about stepping on anything. So I like to get all my mulching done in the fall, and I have a chipper and I rake up all my leaves and pine needles and I run them through the chipper, and then I put them back on the garden again as a mulch. It's basically free mulch. It's a little time consuming, but it's free, and it's a great way to use all your leaves that you rake up, maple leaves, oak leaves, whatever, all make a great mulch if you have a chipper that you can run them through, which makes them finer. You don't want to just put leaves that you rake up directly on your garden because they're too coarse. You need something finer than that. So there we go. We have one last one. Just going to put it right here. Like that. Set it in there. And done. Fall is also the only time that you can plant most spring flowering bulbs like tulips, daffodils, and crocuses. I'm going to plant some tulips right now and show you just how easy it is. You can buy tulips at box stores, at garden centers. I mail order a lot of mine from different catalogs because the selection is better, but I recently bought these locally. Now the trick with most bulbs is the bigger the bulb, the better the flower in terms of size, and also with some plants in terms of the quantity of flowers. For instance, certain daffodils, if you buy a small bulb, will only produce one flower, whereas if you buy a double or triple nosed bulb, you'll get 3. So even though larger bulbs may be a little bit more expensive, they're well worth the cost in terms of the effect. And my feeling is if I'm going to go through all the trouble of planting them, I might as well get as big a show as possible. Now, unlike daffodils and crocuses, in our area, which is the Northeast, tulips generally only provide a good show of bloom for 1, 2, at the most 3 years. So I treat them almost like annuals and put them in every fall in different places with different colors. The thing that's fun about that is that you can really try a lot of different tulip varieties without worrying that you're digging up something that you really liked and that is going to come back. So basically I figure on 2 years per tulip bulb in terms of getting a good show out of it. Now tulips need to be planted, and this is the case with most bulbs, with the pointed side up. Okay, so this is very clear. Here's the bottom, it's the wide side. Here's the top, it's the pointed side. Most people recommend planting your tulip bulbs at least 6 inches deep. I try to go for 8 inches. As it turns out, the deeper you plant them, the longer they last in terms of subsequent years of bloom. Now this trowel has some measurements on it. That's 4 inches, that's 5 inches. What I do is just take a tape measure and measure up to 8 inches, which on this trowel is about here, so that I know how deep to dig my hole without having to constantly measure. When I lay out my tulip bulbs, I always lay them all out before I start planting, and I usually plant them depending on the size of and the height of the plant. This is sort of a tall variety, will probably get about 20 inches tall, so I'll do them about 8 inches apart. I never mix tulip varieties together because I think you get a much better show if you plant all of one variety. So you're just going to set them out kind of on a diamond pattern like this. And I usually try to plant no less than 8, and usually somewhere between 12 and 15 at a time in order to get a really good showing. So right here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I'm putting in 20, and that's going to give me a really dramatic show next year. Planting them is really easy. You don't have to worry that much about making a big hole. You really just have to make a hole big enough to get the bulb in. Once you've got it to the right depth, you take your tulip point side up, you drop it down into the hole, just press it right down in there, and then cover it up again. If your soil is loose, like my soil is, you can actually plant tulips very quickly, and all bulbs can go into the ground really quickly. A lot of people complain that they love the look of spring flowering bulbs, but they don't like planting them. But I have to honestly say, I think that they're one of the quickest, easiest things to plant, and they're pretty much guaranteed to bloom. If you buy bulbs from a reputable dealer, you're almost 100% guaranteed that they will come up and bloom the next year. The reason for that is that unlike most plants, everything that the tulip needs to bloom, the bud, the leaves, are already inside this bulb. They just come out. Unlike, say, a marigold, where the seed sprouts and then eventually it produces flowers. If I were to cut these bulbs open, you would see that the flower bud is already in there. So as long as the tulip is planted somewhat correctly, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a flower the next year because it's already inside the bulb. That's also part of the reason why tulips often stop blooming, because if the growing conditions aren't right, they won't produce enough energy over the course of the spring before their leaves turn brown to actually produce a flower bud the following year. The other thing that you want to check when you're buying bulbs is that they should be firm. These are nice and hard when I squeeze them. If they look rotted or they feel soft in your hand, then you shouldn't buy them because they're probably no good. I'm just working my way through here, And again, this really couldn't be much faster or easier. Sometimes what I'll do is start the hole and then just get the shovel down in there and move it to the side and just push the bulb right in. There's still plenty of time to plant tulip bulbs and daffodils. Usually I'll plant them right up until Thanksgiving, even into early December if it doesn't get too cold. You can keep planting them until the ground freezes. And there we go. In a matter of 5 minutes or so, I just planted 20-odd tulip bulbs, and next year, reflected in this pond, they'll make a beautiful show. These that I just planted are Queen of the Night, which is a purpley, almost black tulip, which will look very dramatic against this pond. Before we do anything else, I just wanted to show you something really fun. Some of you may recall that in an earlier episode, I divided this stand of bearded iris. Now look at them. They're just about to bloom again. Okay, this is a special variety of bearded iris. There's a number of them on the market right now called reblooming bearded iris, and they will bloom not once but twice in a season. They'll bloom in the spring like regular bearded iris, and then they'll bloom again in the fall. Unfortunately, I'm in a cold spot, so I get cold weather and frost before people do, even in Rumford or on the east side of Providence. So mine often get frosted before they open. This particular variety called Golden Harvest is very fragrant, and what I'll do tonight before the frost is cut some of these stems and bring them inside and let them bloom in a vase. But if you have a very warm property or a backyard that has a wall that really stays well heated, you should try some reblooming bearded iris because it's really fun to have irises twice a year. Autumn is also the right time of year to dig up your dahlia tubers and store them over the winter if you decide that you'd like to save them. I find that there's no reason to buy new ones every year, unless of course there's some new varieties that I want to try. It's so easy to dig them up and save them. I store mine. They need a cool, dry place. Some area that doesn't freeze, but probably stays in the 50 to 40 degree range. I have a crawl space under my office that isn't heated and just has a sandy substrate floor, and that's where I store mine, and they do well. Some people say that you should store them in boxes of sand. I literally just put mine in paper bags and they do fine. So I'm going to show you how to dig them up. You want to wait until they're pretty much browned by frost, which these are, and then you want to cut off any strings that you've used to tie them up. Once I've done that, I cut them down. And this is interesting. If you look really closely, you can see I had a very early frost here. Some places nearby have not had frost yet, but I had frost weeks ago. But since it's been warm since then, you can see that this is trying to send up some new growth. But that won't affect my ability to store it over the winter. So I'm just going to cut them way down like that and take the stems out. Now I need to be a little careful because I have this drip hose here which I don't want to disturb, and I also want to make sure that I don't cut into any of the tubers. So I'm going to start out relatively far from the plant and try to get underneath it and just lift it up. There we go. And then I'm just going to gently pull it out of the ground, shake off the dirt. This one already came apart a little bit, which is great. Next year, this will make a plant. In fact, next year I could cut this up and get more than one plant out of it. And I could also get more than one plant out of this. I find they winter over better if I leave them as big clumps, so I don't separate them this time of year. But what I will do is cut off any tubers that are broken. Really doesn't need the roots, and I'll take the top of this stem off. And this is what I will just stick in a paper bag and put in my crawl space, and it will winter over fine. And next year, for the price that, and let me just show you one other thing. When I bought this variety of dahlia, what they sent me was this one little tuber right here. And so you can see that from one little tuber, you get more than one. Now this is a relatively small tuber. Let me show you a much bigger one. So now I'm cutting down another one. Now this one should have produced a really large batch of tubers. In fact, last year, these were so big that I couldn't even fit them in a paper bag, and I just put them in the sand in my crawl space. Okay. Now again, I want to come pretty far away from it. There we go. I'm going to step around to this side. Okay. Let's see, what have we got here this year? Yeah. Look at the size of that. It's almost like potatoes. So what I'm going to do is shake off some of the dirt off of this and actually let it dry a little bit before I put it inside. But you can see, look at all the tubers. Now again, when I mail ordered this particular variety, what they sent me was one tuber about that big. And out of that one tuber, last year I planted 6 of them that I got from one plant, and look at all the plants I could get next year. So for an investment of like $6 or $8 for a dahlia tuber, down the road you get a huge payback. Later I'll go through and dig up all of the rest of them, but I just wanted to show you how that's done. So remember, there's still time for planting bulbs right up until after Thanksgiving. You can put your spring flowering tulips and daffodils in, and it's really worth doing because you'll appreciate it in the spring. I'm Grossman, and this is In the Garden. Hope to see you next time.